So as Alison mentioned earlier, I've been a student at Lancaster University for the past 4 years now. I firstly completed my undergraduate degree here and I studied film, media and cultural studies, so a dual honours, and I've now moved on to do my MA in media and cultural studies. So I thought I would use today to kind of talk a bit about what I like about media and cultural studies from a student perspective, my department and where my research is hopefully going to end up. So hopefully this is useful for anyone who's either signed up for the course already and wants to get some insights, or somebody who's just interested, or somebody who's just interested in media and cultural studies in general and just wants to know a bit more. So for me, the reason why I like studying media and cultural studies so much is that you really get the opportunity to understand the everyday. So it's to understand what's happening around you, not only just within popular culture, but within society as a whole. So this means you really get the chance to theorize overlooked areas of culture that just interest or intrigue you and kind of critically analyze them within your studies. So one such project that I did was an essay on online brand personalities of fast food companies. And I always remember seeing companies, though American companies like Denny's and Wendy's, and they would advertise in these weird and unusual ways where they wouldn't even advertise anything at all. More often than not, they would make these nonsensical posts on Tumblr or random edited photos on Twitter. It didn't have any semblance of direction to it. It was really random and unusual. And I wanted to understand what this meant and what this meant within popular culture as a whole. So for this essay, I decided I wanted to see how this worked to create a site of struggle within popular culture, how these companies were appropriating things like the youth vernacular, so to distance themselves from being a brand, to make themselves seem like people. And so this was like one opportunity where I got the chance to look at something that was quite weird and quite unusual and to theorize it within my studies. And it was really interesting and really insightful. So another example, which we looked into recently within a Gender and Women's Studies summer school module, which took place during the pandemic. So it was an online format. So as part of this module, we decided to look into how celebrity culture has been affected by quarantine. So how has this affected the persona of the celebrity? So one example we looked upon was Gal Gadot's now infamous Imagine video. I imagine quite a few people have actually seen it, but if you haven't seen it, it's where Gal Gadot and a bunch of her celebrity friends sing Imagine from inside their lavish houses and talk about how we're all in the same boat as one another. It has very strong links to that Madonna video where she talks about the pandemic being the great equalizer or something from her big rose petal bathtub. So what I was trying to get with these examples is it gives you the chance to understand something as it's currently happening. It's not an area of study where you're continually looking into the past and seeing about how things were previously done. You're looking into the future, which on the everyday, which I think is really interesting. So another thing I really enjoy about this course is the option to do creative projects for submission, which was something that Helen touched upon, which more often than not, though, within the study itself, you already get the chance of designing your own essay questions or choosing your own interesting case studies to look into, like my weird Denny's essay. But with certain modules, you further get the opportunity of actually creating something that you could potentially show to employers if you wanted to. So I did 2 of these modules, which was digital journalism and visual storytelling and digital audio culture. And with both of these modules, you get the chance to work with tech and editing software like cameras and lighting, like very high-tech stuff. And you also get to conduct interviews as part of your actual, essentially physical essay. So you get to create an artistic piece that simultaneously interrogates the theory that you're looking at within the course. So you're not only just learning about something, you actually get the chance to put it into practice and show off your creative talents, which I think is really valuable. So within the sociology department as a whole, I thought I would talk about what I like about being a student within the department itself. But I thought I would focus on my experiences as an academic rep within the department, because obviously different students have different experiences. They get different values from their own involvement. So I thought I would focus on the values that I gained as an academic rep. So for me, one thing I really like about this department is feeling like you're having a direct impact on the course itself. So the lecturers, they want to hear your feedback, which I think is really valuable. And you feel like you're having a direct impact on the way the course is actually structured. And for me, I always felt like sociology was a bit ahead of the curve in comparison to other departments. So as part of my role as an academic rep, I approve the changes to modules that are happening in light of the pandemic. So saying about how the transition to online, making sure it's fair and equal and really like the students can do the online format essentially. And one thing that always got brought up within conversation was how innovative and forward-thinking the sociology department were. So it wasn't just a case of taking these lectures and just moving them to an online format and expecting things to be exactly the same. It was instead about like taking the online format and intersecting it with intermediate and cultural studies itself. So bringing this lived moment and bringing it into the studies. And then obviously, I feel like I have to say the lecturers in the department themselves are amazing. So you always feel like you can talk to them to bounce off essay ideas or get advice about the future, just absolutely anything really. You feel like you're part of an academic community. And there's even opportunities to collaboratively work on journal papers around shared areas of interest if the opportunity comes up. I was talking about this opportunity I had around alternative news media within the university as a whole. So maybe I'll take that pathway and write a journal paper. I don't know yet, but possibly. And so another thing I'd like to talk about a bit is my dissertation, which is about the aesthetics and productive fandom of constructed nostalgia within Lana Del Rey's newest album. Very long title, lots and lots of things. But instead of just talking about it and just like essentially rattling off what the abstract of my dissertation is, I thought it'd be a bit more interesting to take you kind of down the timeline of my dissertation, how I ended up where I am right now, which is still writing it, but the direction I went. So the research itself was initially inspired by a book I read over the summer called The Artificial Kingdom, which traced the history of kitsch within the 19th century. And it was within these historical considerations into kitsch that I started to draw allusions to the culture industries today, particularly around music. So within the music industry, I noticed this trend where artists were routinely criticized for lacking any sense of authenticity or uniqueness within their songs. They were seen as being, lacking any kind of personality, just part of this machine of mass culture that they had nothing that defined them. And so at the same time, Lana Del Rey had started releasing songs off of her newest album, and I started to read about in reviews of the songs and also kind of my own general perceptions that they had this aura of nostalgia about them. And so I drew connections between this book and this thing going on in culture, and I was like, oh, I could make a dissertation out of this. And so what I decided that I wanted to articulate was how artists were using nostalgia as a means of circumventing some of these tensions around authenticity and uniqueness, but that ultimately these efforts culminate in a form of nostalgic kitsch, a form of nostalgia that doesn't have any meaning, it's devoid of any kind of personality. And so my research became about asking how nostalgia is used to generate fan effect, because we can see within our society today this kind of allure of nostalgia that seems to be pervasive and everywhere around us, that this was one interesting way to kind of get into that and have a look at it. So from this, I developed 3 research areas, which ended up being like 3 different layers of nostalgia that I wanted to articulate. So I wanted to start off by looking at music videos and lyrics from Lana Del Rey, with the focus becoming around how nostalgia was constructed by herself as the artist. So looking into how the video is constructed in terms of like, does it use old film effects? Is there a vinyl sound in the background? Like, what references is she making within the text? Like references to artists like Norman Rockwell or poets like Sylvia Plath? Like, what is the nostalgia being constructed within the text itself? And then as a second layer, critically considering how these artists nowadays have started distributing their music through analog formats. So instead of digitally releasing music, music has seemed to regress, and people are releasing things on vinyl or on cassette tapes, and how this works to create a more authentic nostalgia that comes from this constructed nostalgia. And then finally, I wanted to consider how fans make this nostalgia personal, because the thing with nostalgic kitsch is it's personal to whomever gives it meaning. So how can fans resonate with this form of nostalgia if it's not nostalgic to them? So for this, I've decided to focus on the trend of slowed and reverb edits on YouTube. You might have seen them, you might not, but they're a vein of the lo-fi genre, kind of a cheaper version of chopped and screwed music, where essentially, as the name implies, fans take the music, they significantly slow down the tempo and then add reverb to it. And the comments of these videos and kind of the way they're stylized are incredibly nostalgic. So for this, I just wanted to understand how these fans are creating their own nostalgia within an item that is already nostalgic in essence. So for this, I'm using a combination of rhetorical discourse analysis and visual analysis, seeing how these nostalgic narratives act as a means of persuasion, because that's what it's about. It's persuading the audience, persuading the listener to also feel nostalgic with the artist. So that's really what I want to critically consider, and hopefully will come to fruition in a few months. So finally, I thought I'd just give a bit of advice for anyone who's considering doing this MA, or for anyone who's already signed up, just kind of like advice from a student who's already in this position. So for me, it was really beneficial to start thinking about what I wanted to do early on. So I mentioned about that book that I read. I started to get a concrete idea of where I thought I might like to go with my research. So this doesn't necessarily need to be a concrete idea. It could just be a theory that you particularly like, or a cultural example you're interested in, even just like a media platform you're interested in, just something that gives the research a sense of direction, a sense of where it's going. And then from this, with this just like very small idea, you're able to choose modules that will hopefully benefit you in the dissertation period. So for me, I chose digital audio culture because of its focus on music and the fact that it had a lecture specifically around nostalgia. And then I also chose the module consumer culture due to its focus on commodities, which I figured that my research would likely touch upon when talking about kitsch. So this then means, as a final point, you have all these readings that you've already gathered, all these things that you've already analysed, which you can then apply to your research itself. So you already get a bit of like a step forward when you actually get to the dissertation period. You feel less overwhelmed and you feel ready to take on this very large-scale research project, and it seems less daunting. But yeah, that was kind of my little talk, and I hope it was useful for anyone who's listening.